Hey, folks, welcome back to The Pulse. It's Friday again. It's Stephen Friday again, episode 18, Right Side Up with Steve Staggs. Folks, this is going to be another epic stream. Why? Because the one who created it all has inspired us today, and I'm so excited about that. You know, this journey that we're on that is amazing that we've just done this for 18 episodes is really the result of the Lord saying, "Hey, pay attention to this guy." And of course, what did Steve say to me at that meetup for Texan Token? He said, and ultimately he said every single time, "Hey, why don't you ask him yourself?" And you know what is amazing? The theme for today for me is this idea of so many of us are watching content. You know, I watch my friend Somi. I'm like, yeah, I want to get some alpha, right? Alpha, isn't it interesting? We call it alpha. And we want to get this alpha. I want the good stuff. I want the secret. I want the shortcut. I want the insider information. And what do you think? You know, if you understood when the tops were and the bottoms were, if you understood the moves, if you were able to read the tea leaves, if you will, this whole world is we're trying to get an advantage. And what if I told you that I knew the secret to it all? And of course, you know, many of you that watch this are like, I can guess what your Sunday school answer is going to be, Crypto Heartbeat. But I'm going to make a really, hopefully, a strong case. We're going to have a discussion about this, about what is really the secret to this whole thing. And why does it seem like a secret? Because it's not meant to be a secret. And that's really the point. This is not meant to be a secret at all. But because we live in this upside down world, it becomes like one. And of course, I think it should be attractive to many people because so many people out there are desiring to have the alpha. And what they don't recognize is that there's one who literally has the infinite intelligence that has created it all. And what's interesting about it is you don't have to pay attention too long to recognize that there's a structure and a framework to this stuff. But there have been those who have gotten in the way. So without further ado, let's bring in my buddy Steve. What's up, Steve?
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing good. Doing good.
Looking good in the green today again. I love it.
Yeah. Well, you know, the background's kind of green, so we
Yeah.
kind of blend in, I think is what you were kind of
It's good. It's good. You're looking good, and it's great to visit with you. We've had a couple of great conversations offline recently, and it seems like we're just seeing Jesus work in amazing ways. And it's so cool to see not only our own personal development, but also just to see what's happening in the world and seeing these things play out. And what I've appreciated so much about you, Steve, is helping me have a new perspective. And that's really, I think, what the whole theme of this is. You know, we talk about right side up with Steve Staggs. What does that mean? Well, we're in an upside down world, and I don't think you have to be like particularly, you know, religious or, you know, somebody who is full of faith or not to recognize that things are not the way that they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
You know, so that's, you know, a big part of what we'll talk about today. But let's say hello to our friends. We got some friends in here. We got Sam Kemp as number one. Good morning to you, Sam. Thanks for all the updates on Mike. That's been really nice.
Yes.
So
By the way, Mike is out of the hospital and at home, starting to do his rehab at the house, and said to give a shout out to everybody. He misses us all, and he'll be joining us quickly as he can.
Awesome. Well, that's fantastic. And I assume he'll probably get a chance to listen on the playback at some point when he gets a chance.
Yeah.
But Mike, yeah, I mean, that's what's so cool too about this. Is the community aspect of it. Just, we're gaining new friends, we're connecting with people, and it's what I love about it, Steve, is it's kind of like there's kind of unspoken understanding we have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's certain
Yeah.
things we don't really have to talk about, even though we love talking about them. There's certain
Yeah.
things we just don't have to talk about. It's just assumed, and it's good, right?
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
I really love that. David Lee's here as well, all the way from Southwestern Indiana. He's had big transition these last couple weeks with kids going off to college.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he's been a busy fellow driving all over Indiana. My online ghost is here. What's up? And someone new, Ahmad. Hi, first like, I think. Awesome. Thanks for being here, Ahmad. I appreciate you. The beard is looking great, David Lee says. It's getting there. You're getting ready for Christmas.
Yeah, it's me and Santa are going to be hanging pretty soon.
Absolutely. Look, well, check this out. We got ZZ Tesco. So he is on his, I think, third round trip to Maine from Texas, taking his daughter to school for the year. So she's going to be actually in a ballet intensive like all year long. So a boarding school, like a big commitment from his family. So he's driving his daughter up to Maine.
Wow.
And so he's listening in the car.
Way to go.
Yeah. So it's awesome to have you, ZZ Tesco, Mr. Ray. So good to have you guys here. David Lee, of course. So Steve, let's kind of kick this off with this idea and anything you want to kind of share to reinforce this idea. I was inspired this morning because I'm hearing all the time, why do I look at the news? Why do I look at crypto news? Why am I interested in what's happening in the world? Why do I pay attention to Twitter? Why do I look at the charts? Right. And I think from a very secular perspective and from just a man in the Western world perspective and somebody who's in kind of the financial world, I kind of want to know what's going on, right? I want to kind of I want to know the heartbeat of what the market is doing and things. But why? So I've kind of asked myself, why am I so interested in this? And is it just curiosity? Or do I think that if I combine all this information, I might get an edge? And I think so many people out there want the alpha, they want the edge, they want the secret, they want to get ahead, they want to be successful, whatever their definition of it is. And they're always looking around for, I think, sometimes a shortcut. And I think, in the general cultural way, we think of there are no shortcuts, right?
Yeah.
There are no silver bullets. But here's what's really interesting is that this is all in the context of this upside down world. And so when we talk of Jesus in the right side up world, we are talking and you are sharing that, hey, there's a way that this was an order and a structure and a rank, and there's a way it's supposed to be. And that way is actually the way of the kingdom.
Yes.
And that has so many benefits to it. But it's the contrast against this upside down world that shows such contrast. Because if there was no darkness and this would be just the way that it is. And so will you talk about this? Because I think that what's amazing to me is it's like the patience of Jesus himself saying, I'm gonna finance your debauchery, my friend, so that you understand my nature and character. And once you kind of empty yourself, you're going to recognize that what you've wanted all along has actually been here all along. What are your thoughts on that concept?
Well, I was probably the short answer is that it's an expression of our innate ability to rule being unsatisfied. We are created for the purpose of ruling the Father's kingdom with him in the fullness of his nature and character. That's what we are created to do. And so everything we see in the upside down world, particularly related to what you're describing here, wanting to get ahead, is because we know that we have been created to rule, whatever our vocabulary would be to describe that, but that is totally atrophied. It's unfulfilled, it's unsatisfied. And so we're constantly searching for ways to satisfy that very simple and pure attribute of our makeup, which is to rule. Not just rule so we can be the boss and tell everybody what to do or to gain an advantage, but to rule in the fullness of God's nature and character that intends has no animosity, has no intention to gain advantage, it doesn't have any of those. It is just this pure expression of ruling, which is reserved for dealing with elements and influences that jeopardize his kingdom and the mission he's given us, within his kingdom. So to me, the short answer, I'm repeating myself, but to me, it's an expression, wanting to get ahead is an expression of an unsatisfied expression of ruling. We have to get out there and get ahead, which, by the way, if you go into, just the story of the prodigal son, what did he want to do? He wanted to go out there and do what he wanted to do with with his inheritance. He didn't want to be accountable to anybody. He didn't want to answer anybody. He was the sum total of his universe. Where did the sum total of him being his universe get him? Eating slop with pigs. And so part of that story is him coming to recognize that, man, he was in a much better position as a slave in his father's house than it was being ruler of his own life when he is the universe, when he is the center of that universe.
Apart from his father.
And so there's this, I keep wanting to say dissatisfaction, but it's not a dissatisfaction. It is an unfulfilled element. And so, like evil is a perverse use of power, so this desire to get ahead is a perverse expression of rulership. And so to me, that once you come into what the idea is that the Father has in us ruling with him, man, things get so much more relaxed and simple. It's more about releasing than it is confiscating and extracting. It is because in the release there's flow.
Yeah.
The stuff flows when there's a release, but when in an extraction and confiscation, there is a cessation of that flowing.
Yep.
And man, we could go into pictures of, life is in the blood and what happened, with the breakup of, the assembly and Acts and how he sent persecution to scout. We go through all kinds of examples where it's, no, listen, I need to teach you how to rule and rule with me in the fullness of my nature and character. And when you learn that, things are going to get a whole lot easier for you in your life.
Yeah, let's camp out there. That's really good. I want to say hello to Crypto Bigfoot, Hexonium, and Hex Monkey. What's going on? Another inspiring stream. Good to have you guys here. So, okay, let's talk about this idea of flow, and let's use a different metaphor then.
Okay.
I think about in Texas, right? It's super dry right now. We haven't had rain in months. And I imagine, you've got a stream that's always wet, regardless of the weather. And, if we use this metaphor, let's say you're someone that, it runs through your property and you decide that you're going to build a dam. And I think about, building up my crypto bags, saving up a bunch of money, hoarding things and putting it in my barns. Let's say I literally cut off all the water from downstream. And I said, I'm going to build this giant lake and I'm just going to hoard this water. And let's say I literally cut it off. I put a dam in and I build this giant lake so I can, fish and I can do the things I want to do. And of course, I have way more water than I need. I've got green grass, everything's, taken care of on my end. That metaphor of putting in a weir, right, which is really, I guess, more of a dam to hold back. It seems like when we don't understand who we are in him, what our purpose was and what we were created to be, when we don't recognize in the context of creation this idea of, all right, who is our father? And I understand his nature and character, and my desire and need to bless and protect and to rule and to reign. Hold on, this is an extension of him, and only in him can I do these things that are aligned with the order of creation. I tend to step outside of that, like the prodigal son, and I go, no, it's running through my property. I mean, this is my land. This is
Yeah.
mine. I'm going to dam this up, and I'm going to keep the people downstream from having this. And I feel like that's, we talked about left hand of the slide, right hand of the slide, which I don't know that everybody's got context to, but this upside down, right side up thing.
Yeah.
The upside down world is when it says, get yours at the expense of others. And what's amazing to me is you're right. The prodigal son literally was like, no, I want to try my hand at this. I want to do it apart from you.
Yeah.
Give me what I'm owed and let me go do it apart from you. Amazing, amazing story. But it seems like we're damming up all kinds of things that are meant to flow.
Yeah.
Share more in that context of that metaphor of, it seems like you talk so much about the structure and order and all of these things, the timing, the rank, everything being turned upside down. And we keep on supporting it.
Well, yeah, because we only know what we're taught.
Yeah.
I mean, we're taught to think a particular way, and you can't think a way differently than what you've been taught. Back to our picture of the baby coming into the world. The baby is simply driven by its impulses when it first shows up. And those impulses are designed to deal with the most immediate needs that the baby has, ranging from needing something to drink to something to eat, to the relief from what's in their pants. I mean, there's, the drive and need for warmth, for love, for relationship, for a joining with their parents that they don't, that word doesn't even mean anything to them, but they inherently know. So all of this is about the flow that goes back and forth that's inherent within it. And if you stop that flow, you create something perverse as a result, because in the flow is provision and blessing in the flow. You stop that and you stop the flow of provision and blessing. In the picture of the stream that you're talking about, and a guy damming it up because it's on his property, and now he has plenty, but the people downstream, well, he has plenty, but the people downstream, they start experiencing scarcity. Well, what you just described is the economic order on the left hand side of the slide. That's the upside down world of the economic system that's put in place. It is intentionally designed to create scarcity or the impression of scarcity. And so we could talk again an entire episode on just, okay, why is scarcity important? Well, it's what makes our economic engine work, primarily because it creates a compulsion in the wealth producers to continue to go to work for just the cost of labor. And then all the wealth produced by the labor, that's the flow, is then reserved for those who are now pooling up or damming up that flow of economic resource. And so what happens when you do that? There is an illusion of scarcity. The farmers downstream are experiencing an illusion. It's not what is true. It's an illusion. But for them, it appears to be true. So what do? They start expending all kinds of resource to resolve their scarcity when there was no scarcity at all. And in that redirection of their effort, now they become controlled to accomplish and dedicate their labor to some other enterprise or outcome that distracts them from the purpose that they've been created. They've been created to be farmers, and what are they doing? They're spending all kinds of time in this example. They're spending all kinds of time trying to find resource of water. Now, the question is, once they experience that themselves, do they become one who dams up the abundance of water that they find, or do they release it and allow it to flow? See, that's the question that every one of us are posed with. Are you going to allow the resources to flow because that's where provision and blessing exists, or are you going to dam it up so that you create for yourself the appearance of abundance, and on the other end, the illusion of scarcity for those that are downstream from you?
Yeah. Well, and you think that this is such a powerful metaphor for life in general. Who is downstream? That could be your family. That could be so many different things of in your own life. I mean, this idea of water is obviously a huge metaphor in scripture as well. But there's so many examples of this, right? You've been forgiven, and then you go beat the guy who owes you money. I mean, there's so many examples of saying, hold on. I mean, even with Israel saying, we want a king like everybody else has got. And you go, hold on a second. It seems like, Steve, a lot of this is driven by our own fear. And that we have this fear that, well, I have to amass so much because there's not enough to go around. And that, I have to get mine regardless of anyone else. But there's so many stories. And this is why it becomes almost so simple in some respects to say, it's obvious that this is not the way it was intended to be. And we see it play itself out with, hoarding. Well, what's hoarding a result of? Well, it's a result of my own discontentment and my own fear that there is not going to be enough, or my desire that if I have this resource, I can lord it over you. I can have power, position, recognition. And this is the battle of this upside down world. And of course, we've got one who is lying to us in this process. But that's why I brought up this whole concept, because it's everything, it seems like, is counterintuitive, right? You've been trained a certain way to see it a certain way. It's in so many things. And then we see it play out in, big, social experiments as well. On one hand of the spectrum, you see communism, right? And you're like, well, this clearly isn't fair. So we've got to dictate and put our hand to this. Rather than letting it flow, we're going to dictate its distribution, which is a centralized thing. And then you've got, this, crony individualistic thing that's like every man for himself. And you see, it's not that Jesus is, liberal or conservative. This is a third way. Yeah. And I think that what's so neat about it is he says, I am the way.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really neat is that if you're somebody out there who is desiring, I am guilty of this. I want to get ahead. I want to be secure. I want to make sure, families provided for, all of these kind of things. And what is the scorecard in this upside down world? But it's a number in a bank account. It's social signaling. It's my Rolex. It's the clothes I wear, the cars I drive. But, we're whitewashed tombs. Yeah. And, there's a secret in all of this that's actually not a secret, because it's the way it was intended to be from the beginning. And it's almost a bridge for me to the kingdom. Yeah. Is that if we can understand that, if the evil one can say to us, Jesus is not alive and he doesn't speak, what a way to say, well, I'm on my own. I got to do my own thing. I have to, and we have this desire to rule and reign, and we know that with him is the key. But what ends up happening is what we're told is, and what we're taught, and what we're reminded of constantly is, he's not here. There's no help. There's no hope. And so fear drives the name of the game. And of course, everything becomes upside down. And it's almost the amazing thing to me, Steve, is I feel like this is the secret and purpose of life.
Yeah.
What we've talked about over the, like, this is it. You want contentment, you want provision, and you want to fulfill why you were created. Jesus is alive and he speaks. In that pathway, I do not give as the world gives, right? A peace I give to you. I do not give as the world gives. And you're like, wow.
Well, back to your comment earlier about there are so many examples given in scriptures that portray this. Out of your belly will flow rivers of living water. Out from the throne of God flows a river out, and on both sides are trees, and the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nations. Um, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly, that you would have joy and that your joy would be abundant. All of these things are fundamental to how we have been created. A person who is content and satisfied doesn't seek to exploit somebody else.
Yeah.
There's no motivation to do it. Rather, the motivation is that the other person would be content and satisfied. Okay, so what would happen if we all learned how to be content and satisfied? Would we be exploiting? Would we see what's happening in this country and the way it's happening and what's going on around the world? No, when a person seeks to seize from another, it is an evidence that they are not content, that they are not satisfied, that there is something missing in them. Well, okay, why don't we deal with that? See, instead of belly aching about the craziness, why don't we start saying, hey, wonder why we're crazy? What the heck is going on here? How is it when I was in high school, the three greatest offenses that high schoolers committed was chewing bubble gum, smoking in the bathrooms, and ditching classes. Well, today we have metal detectors because we're terrified that some kid's going to come in and whack everybody. Well, wait a minute. There is not a couple inches of difference between those two pictures. They are not even in the same universe. So what is it that has created that chasm of emptiness and dissatisfaction and anger, whatever it is that's in there that's causing that? Why don't we deal with that? Why don't we start looking at that piece of it? I mean, think about this for a minute. In your example of the farmer who dams up the stream. Well, we have these things called rights, and in that instance, it would be water rights. Well, okay, in our country, our rights are deemed to be inalienable and given to us by our Creator. So if we apply that to the stream, we being the partners with Jesus to rule the planet, the flow of water is a provision that provides blessing and opportunity that is not to be dammed up so that some accumulate and others are deprived. It's to allow the free flow of the provision from the source of that provision, who is God himself, released through the creation he made. Well, guess what? That's an inalienable right. And yet what do? We go to the state to start giving us rights, instead of standing up and saying, hey, wait a minute. We are the sovereigns, and the sovereigns here are being deprived of the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which includes this flow of water that comes through. Well, if there is satisfaction, contentment, all the things that come through the fullness of God's nature and character, guess what? The guy who's got the stream doesn't dam it up. It doesn't even enter his mind.
Right. Well,
It doesn't even enter his mind. Well, I'd kind of like to learn how to live like that.
yeah. And you know what's so amazing about it is I think about, um, in I've heard stories of certain communities, like when those that went west encountered the Pueblo Indians, they went over the pass right into, like, they were amazed. And there's such interesting stories about coming to meet a new society of people. And there was, and if you look at those accounts, it's really interesting how peaceful and with the land and how, you know, content people were. You also see people who go on these short-term mission trips and they go to these places where they think, oh, I'm going to this poor place where people are so sad and oppressed because they don't have iPhones. And then they get there and they recognize something very, very different, right? They think they're going to minister, and what they really find is that, hold on, why are these kids that don't have these screens and don't have these things and are really forced to be in relationship to light and dark and water that runs and earth that produces? It's almost like, how interesting that what we have made up in our minds is something that's bad is actually has joy in it that we want, right?
Yeah,
I find that a lot of people go to these places and they're like, why are these children so happy? Why are
yeah,
these children so content? And you think about this idea of, um, where does sin come in? And where do these things about covetousness, right? This idea of I would need to have that.
yeah,
And discontentment. I mean, this is the illustration of it all. Now, in the context of that, we've got this thing that starts in a garden, right? And of course, it kind of ends in a city, right? There is progression and development in all of this. But you mentioned it before, and I'd love for you to reiterate this idea of what would it look like if you were someone who listened to the living Jesus and you were asked to lead? How would you animate and how would you see things? And
yeah,
you talked in terms of this idea of what does it mean to rule and reign in the nature and character of God? What does it mean to bless and protect? And you said that farmer didn't even think, he wouldn't even have thought to dam up the stream because he understands his relationship to it. That's, I mean, this is really the answer in my opinion to, we have to understand ourselves in the context of not only creation but one another. And I just keep coming back, like, everything kind of jumps off the page now. This idea of asking Jesus what the two most important commandments were. It's like,
yeah,
well, love God and love other people. Well, what happens when you love your neighbor as yourself? Well, you don't dam up the stream on him.
yeah, yeah.
It's a
No, that's
beautiful thing.
what, and it's so, when you get right down to it, it's so flippin' practical.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the amount of energy that we expend on things that are absolutely destructive. And I'm talking primarily in the context of this, I got to get mine, that's birthed out of this dissatisfaction. I was reading something, a friend of mine named Ray. I have a friend named Ray also.
Awesome. Best kind of friend.
Yeah. And Ray writes these poems most every day. He's been writing them for years. Um, and he really has a heart for people, really wants to get to know Jesus in this very practical, moment by moment way, not just to know about him, but to actually live in the manner that we're describing. And he has spent a lot of time in prisons over the years. And prisoners get out, and he puts them to work and things of that nature. So in this morning's um, writing that he sent out, he was talking about, what do you do when somebody like that, you give them a job but they don't show up to work, or you get loan of money and they spend it on booze and drugs. They call you at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and because they know you're going to be there to help them out. Um, And when you try to help him out, and then he quoted this one guy, he said, Ray, you've been pushing Jesus on me for years, but I need some real help. Now think about what that guy just said.
Yeah.
Hey, Jesus has been pushed on this guy, and he doesn't see Jesus as real help. He needs real help. He is screaming out for real help. Well, what does he need help from? The thing that is creating the dissatisfaction, the absence of satisfaction. He cannot rule over the thing that is ruling him. He doesn't know how to do that. Well, I can tell a guy about the concepts and the elements of ruling and where rulership exists and how it's exercised and things like that. But I can't teach you how to rule in the context of your divine purpose. Only Jesus can do that. And talking about Jesus to somebody doesn't get it done. You actually got to engage the game. You got to get in the game. You got to say, okay, Jesus, I've heard all about this. Is this stuff for real, or is this just another bunch of garbage? Well, if your question is authentic, fasten your seatbelts.
Yeah.
Because he's going to teach you how to do these things. He's going to take you at your word.
You know what's
because
amazing
he is the way.
Yeah.
He's going to show you the way because he is the truth. He's going to tell you the truth of how it works. And that the result of that is life. And guess what life brings? Light. Why do we want to get ahead? Why do we want to know what's around the corner? Why do we want to gain some advantage? Because we can't stand living in darkness. And yet we never connect. That's exactly why we thirst for knowing what's around the corner. We can't stand not knowing. Okay? Because there's an absence of satisfaction in us that what's around the corner, we will have what we need to deal with it when it shows up. And if there's something I need to do today to be prepared for what's going to happen tomorrow or a week or a month or a year from now, guess what? That's part of today's portion of work. And when you learn how to live in that, it's like, whoa, man, this is a very different way of living. Why didn't anybody tell me about this? Well, we're telling you.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, we're in this, we live in this world where it's upside down, and we're constantly seeing it. And I think the more I've journeyed down this path, the more I see it for what it is, right? It's real clear when I'm dealing with something that's upside down and is extractive and it's fear-based and all of those things. And of course, you think about manipulation, the crafty nature of things, we talk about authority in this context as well. This idea, well, what does it mean to rule? And I think about ruling has an element of authority to it. And so many people, you said at the very beginning of all this, you've forgotten who you are because you don't see yourself as a son of the king. You don't see yourself as one who has authority. You've been told that you're an accident and the descendant of a monkey, and that you were just you tripped and fell into this thing. And this right siding up, I was thinking about what's the order of these things. Well, do you not know who is your father? Do you not know who is your king? Do you not know of what class you are?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think of this concept of royalty, which is somewhat of a man-made construction. But this idea of, do you see yourself as a king? And I think that our ideas of kings, you said it before, is not to dominate people and to lord over them. But you made a really good point, and maybe this is a good time to talk about this, is the classes. When I look out, you don't have to be a genius and you don't have to know the Bible to look around. Just stop for a second and go, who is like us?
Yeah.
Okay, so mankind, men and women, people on this earth. I put out some corn last night and the deer came. And I sat out on the porch and I just like watching. They're real quiet, but you can hear them crunching the corn, and I just love just sitting there watching them.
Yeah.
And I think about this fact that these deer don't build companies. These deer don't, draw pictures. They have a role and they play that role. They don't really have a choice to not play that role.
Yeah.
My dog, I've got two dogs, the big dog, the little dog, two in if I don't watch the big dog will eat the little dog's food.
Yeah.
And, I don't blame the dog for doing that. The food's out. And that's what a dog does. We have this ability that's different than the animals, this ability to choose. But I think most people don't realize that we exist in a world where we don't acknowledge that there is a other side of the coin, that
Yeah.
there is we live in this world and we're the only ones that have this ability of being in the spiritual and the physical at once. And what's amazing to me is, why is there all this tension? Because we have something that someone outside of our class wants.
Yeah.
And you've said this so many times. You said, there's this Elohim class, right? There are these that are, you're adopted as a son. You're a son of the king. So if I'm a child of God, I've created in his image, right? And to be conformed to his likeness, to be like him in his nature and character. Well, there are this other group of people. And so many people think the angels are higher level, right? It's upside down. If you understand that this whole battle that's going on between in the spiritual realm is, in a way, we're jealous that you have this birthright that we do not have. You have an authority we do not have. And we're going to do everything we can to get that authority from you. And guess what? They've been really successful at convincing people on this planet right now and giving away their authority to them in so many different ways. And to me, it's probably the most valuable thing I've learned from you is to understand and to be reminded that actually who you are in him isn't some passive thing. It's actually a purposeful thing. He wants you to partner with him. He wants to, we live in the context of time. He wants us to rule and reign in his nature and character. But that requires that you recognize who you are.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the classes and how that fits together?
Well, yeah, I've told the story on previous episodes, kind of, going back into my my baseball career when I was in Venezuela, and we were getting ready to open up. Opening day down there is our winter up here.
Okay.
So when your season is over up here, a lot of times a lot of players go down to South America, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Mexico, to play ball down there during our winter, which is their season. And we were getting ready to getting the team together. Opening day was a couple days away, and I remember standing by the batting cage, and literally it was like a light switch went off inside of me, where it was, oh, I now know what it is to be a hitter. Now that probably doesn't mean anything to anybody out there unless they've had that experience. Okay. But I had been hitting for years. And if you would have told me that I wasn't yet a hitter, in that very narrow meaning of that, in the reality of the essence of that state, I would have told you that you were crazy. After all, I was a professional baseball player. I was making a living at something that other people were doing for free. And yet, the moment that light switch went on, boink, it was like living in an entirely new universe. I had become what I said I was, yet was not yet there.
Wow. And
when it happened, it was massive in the change, in the shift that it had in me. And I've also shared with you on opening day, hit 3 home runs that opening day. And, it was like, wow, I guess this is what it was to be a hitter, right? Now, why am I giving you that example? Because we can talk all day long about being a part of the ruling class. We can create all kinds of rationale about why that is true. We can talk about the Elohim class being the ruling class, and the angelic class being the ministering class, and the animals being the serving class, and we can create all kinds of really cool and nifty teaching, curriculum, and put on streams and do all kinds of stuff. We could start churches over that stuff. And yet not one person would know what it was to be an Elohim until the moment that Jesus turns on the switch. Now let me give you an example how that works in real life, because these are not designed to be religious concepts. These are designed to say, hey folks, there is a different way of living.
Yeah.
It's there. I can tell you about it, but Jesus is actually the guy who's going to teach you about it. If you're interested, go talk to him about it. And let me tell you what, you're going to start learning some things and seeing some things that are totally brand new to you. And like you've described in your own experience, man, once you start seeing, you can't unsee any longer. It's just there. You're going, oh, wow, I didn't even know that was there. I didn't even know I was using that vocabulary. That was 100% contrary to what I said. Here's an example, a very practical way. We were talking the other day about Richard Hart and the SEC and stuff like that. And we were talking about that in the context of, the Obama deal with, the Green family, dealing with the
Healthcare.
The healthcare issues and things of that nature. The entire way that we are taught is that the Constitution guarantees our rights. So we find ourselves being taught that we are appealing to the Constitution for our constitutional rights. And the government is there to defend and protect our constitutional rights. Well, what does that do? Does that not make the Constitution superior to us?
Yeah, it concedes authority to it.
Okay. Now, those who are sworn to defend the Constitution, which they will tell you all day long in Congress, what will they do? Who then becomes superior in that relationship? If you are going to defend something, who is more powerful? The thing that is defended or the ones defending? So what do we have? We have now the upside down world working right in front of our eyes, and we don't know it. We don't recognize it. Why? At least in part because we don't know what it is to be of the Elohim class. If we were actually hitters, if we were actually aware that we are the Elohim, that we are the rulers, that we are the ones who are partnering with Jesus to rule the creation with him in the fullness of his Father's nature and character. If we knew that, instantly we would see, wait a minute, Green family, why are you appealing to religious rights? Richard, why would you be appealing to the rights of free speech? No. That's not how this works. I am not appealing to you. What I'm telling you is that you have superseded and exceeded your authority. That Constitution does not delineate and protect my rights. It delineates the limitations on your exercise of power and authority. You have exceeded that. Well, what do you mean? See, now all of a sudden, until you get that, until the Elohim concept becomes a reality in your life, it's very hard to connect with that idea.
Well, and why would you attack? Why would you want people to not see them as sons of God? In a way, it's like this whole idea of, um, evolutionary billions and billions of years. This, I mean, in and of itself, the very core of public education, is and secularism is about removing any sense of your own personal authority in likeness of the creator. And it's
Yeah,
like, well, and you realize these things are the barriers. We talked about the damming up of the water. Well, if you can convince people, and I mean, think about this: how many times in history have people convinced that one group is better than the other, right? Pitting people against each other.
yeah,
You're 3/5 of a human, or whatever it may be.
yeah,
There's so many times in which, and I think it's such an empowering, you know, message. Is I think the term Elohim to a lot of people that haven't, because I had a hard time with it, because
yeah,
I'm like, I understand what you mean by it.
yeah,
And I think about this, more simply to me is, are you created in the image and likeness of him? Are you a son? Well, I think about my own son. We adopted my son. And so this is like,
yeah,
front and center in my life,
yeah,
because my son questions things. He's like, well, not really part of your family, Dad. I'm like, no, hang on a second. You're
yeah,
actually probably more. And so we get a chance to talk about this idea of being adopted into a family. Well, what comes along with being in the family? And what comes along with being an heir?
yeah,
And if you don't recognize, and that's the whole story of the prodigal son, right? He got to the point where he understood. I mean, it's such a great picture. Without me, you can do nothing. It is true. But with me, we can do everything,
yeah,
right? This idea of I'm the vine, you're the branches. Without me, you can do nothing. Well, okay, but it's in accordance and it's in alignment with my nature and character. When you understand who the Father is, and that's the thing that I think about this idea of what's our responsibility in how Jesus taught us to pray. What is our responsibility and our calling in this trajectory of the redemption of all things, where ultimately Jesus is our light. And I think about this idea of what is this thy kingdom come on earth
yeah,
as it is in heaven. And to me, there's such an element of community in that, because it seems like you can't you can't support this idea of kingdom without considering people, others, in its context. It's not just you and Jesus. It's no, it's a family, right? That has many parts, and it has many, and it's interesting how unity is such a powerful idea in the scriptures and in this whole context of, well, the Father and I are one. Well, that's unity.
yeah,
Well, he wants us to be united and be like-minded with him, and then he's calling us also to unity. And all of these amazing things that I see in the scriptures, like the beginning of the early church, I see like, wow, people were like of one mind, and they were considerate of each other, and they, you know, were supportive, and it's, it's a picture not of communism, right? And it's not of the upside down world. It's a third way. And it's amazing that Jesus described himself as the way.
well, yeah, I mean, we keep coming back to the same place because
Yeah.
that's the source. I mean, there one things that happens with language that we've also talked about is language is not intended to impart experience. It's only intended to partially describe enough so that a person can determine if they're interested in pursuing the experience. And so language by its very nature is very, very limited in its capability and capacity um, to do anything other than introduce and describe. Okay, that's basically all it's capable of doing. Even within the framework of those limitations, the words possess an incredible power, authority, and meaning when they are understood in the context of the one who created the words. In other words, just not created the formation of sounds to create a word, but the one who created the very capability to communicate, the transfer of an idea, thought, intention, that's in the mind, using the vessel and vehicle of language to convey that to another, to where the person on the other end goes, oh, wow, I know exactly what you mean. Whoa, I never thought about it like that before. And it's like, oh man, now I'm starting to get it. Well, what is that? That is an invitation to pursue the experience that the words are simply describing. And so we have that same thing happening, with Elohim. We don't have a problem with angel because we use that a lot and it's a very common word. We don't have a problem with animal because that's a very common word. What we have a problem with is Elohim. Why? Because it's not common to us. It is an entirely foreign concept that has been kept from us, and yet it's one of the most profound words we could ever hear and begin to pursue the experience of what it is to be an Elohim.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, that's not an English word. It's a word that comes from another language, but that language, like English, came from the one who designed the ability to communicate and to convey ideas and thoughts through the mechanism of language.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, Jesus, I want to know what the heck you meant by that. What did you mean? I don't even know what that word is.
Yeah.
Steve, you really want to know? Well, yeah, because you said in the beginning, in the chief beginning of time, order, and rank, the Elohim, form, fashioned, and shape his heavens and his earth, of which I'm a part. What the heck? Who are the Elohim? And then later on, you said you called Adam an Elohim. What in the world are you talking about? Was I around when you created everything? Is that what is that what you're telling me? That's somehow, some way. You see, you can go into all kinds of things like Nicodemus. What do you mean, Jesus? We need to be born from above. The translators screw that whole thing up and completely distort and distract what Jesus was saying by making it born again. No, Jesus didn't say you got to be born again. Jesus said you got to be born from above. Unless you're born from above, you can't even see the kingdom of God. Now, think about that in the context of what you just asked a minute ago about angels wanting something that the Elohim possessed, that human beings possessed. Do we have any comprehension that the angelic class cannot even see the kingdom of God the way that we do? Can't even see it. Oh, is that why Satan wanted to create his own kingdom? Because he could at least see what he was building? But in terms of what God was doing, it was a total mystery to him? No, unless you were born from above. You can't even see it. And by the way, you can't participate in it unless you were born both of water and spirit. So man, if he didn't even complicate it more in a way for the angelic class. So, it's just not being born, born again. No, that's a totally false concept. It's being born from above. Everything that is in you, that is about you, comes out from the very essence of the Father when it comes to you. It is birthed in him and takes shape in and through you.
Yeah.
And once you see that, you start seeing the kingdom of God. You
Well, no,
start participating in the kingdom of God. You're going, oh, gee whiz, this thing is for real.
well, no wonder he said, "Without me, you can do nothing."
Yeah, that's
You
it.
know, it's yeah, it's amazing. You know what's really cool about this is, why are we attracted to certain things? And so I just look at, just observe the
Yeah,
world and creation in our lives, and I look at it and I go, well, I'm different than my dog is, right?
yeah,
I've got something. If I said, what, I want to build a new dining room table, I might not be the best, woodworker, but you know what? I could come up with a design. I'd probably look online, get inspired by a certain design. I'd say, all right, what do I want to make this? Well, I want to make this top out of walnut. Well,
mhm,
I don't like kicking, when you're in the crack of a table and, you don't want to hit your knees on the steel. Okay. So I start thinking about, what do I want of this dining room table? And what would my wife like?
yeah,
There's probably a certain type of wood, there's probably a certain style in the home. And I start thinking about this, right? Everything that's ever been created in this world has been an exercise of an example of this Elohim that we are, meaning this
yeah,
ability to create. And what happens is, it's interesting. If you've ever planned anything and thought through anything, and we've built, um, crypto contracts. You have to decide, what do I want to accomplish, and then you think about psychology of what does this accomplish with this tokenomic. But it's the same thing with anything that we would create, is this ability to, we think of speech as just talking.
yeah,
What we don't realize is actually this formulation of ideas becomes something tangible in a plan. That plan then becomes, all right, I might want to mock this up in a cheaper wood because I know I'm going to probably mess something up, and I'm going to measure twice before I cut. But this idea that I could go from not having a table to having a table is actually, that process of creation
yes,
is the differentiation of who we are. And if you ever wanted to kind of just understand what makes us different than the animals, but also the angels, why would they care about us? Why would they want our authority? Why would they want this birthright? Why would there be jealousy? And you think about this idea of, what did it look like in the garden? What did it look like, before this all entered? What I think is amazing, and I think probably one of the biggest aha moments for me, was when you asked me the question. You said, "Did it surprise God that the serpent was in the garden?"
yeah,
And I think that that is one of the most profound questions that anyone could be asked, because I think what is shared with us most often is that this was a surprise and that he had snuck into the garden.
yeah,
And what I think is so interesting is to say, no, so many stories in all of these parables, why would he be saying the kingdom of heaven is like?
yeah,
It's like this, it's
yeah,
like that. I'm showing you the structure of the kingdom of heaven.
yes,
I think what's really interesting is, all right, so if all of this stuff is to say, you can bet on it. You know what? Every single time I've thrown a baseball, it's always kind of gone down towards the earth. Every time I've knocked a um, coffee cup off the table, it's always fallen down.
yeah,
And I think about this. Well, I've learned some things about life. That there's some rules. Well, who created all of that? And are there rules to it all? Well, yeah. Look what science does, right? Science is just someone who's like, well, I observe something, I get an idea of what it might be, and let me go test and see if it's true. But all we're uncovering is that which was created. And I keep coming back to this. God created a system in which there's incentive. And those incentives, we have, I don't know what the term is, but we have um bastardized these incentives.
yeah,
We've basically we've modified these incentives, and it's probably most articulated in, I think, what resonates with our hearts. I'm really enamored by this song, "Rich Men North of Richmond,"
yeah,
because it to me is it's a symptom of a condition and of a time that we live in. But I think about it, why are so many people touched by that? And I think about movies and all this stuff. Why is it? And it's almost like it's a hat tip to the creator himself. Every single story that we ever tell each other, you know what it's about? It's about one man who wants something, right? And what do they do in these movies? They say, "Hey, this one man is he's flawed, he's vulnerable, and I need you to like him. And he's going to be on a journey to get something. And in the process of going to that, getting that something, he actually learns and receives something greater in return and realizes that the thing that he had journeyed so far to go after is actually not what he wanted all along. And it's an interesting story here for us as we think of discontented people.
Yeah.
Is that we are, and I find myself in this situation. I've had so many experiences where I've operated out of my fear and discontentedness, and I've journeyed, and he's brought me all the way back around, just like the prodigal son. And he said, "See, I've been here all along, whispering in your ear, and you're going to go through all of these things." And now I recognize, okay, so the serpent in the garden and the darkness is a reminder of the contrast of who you are in your nature and character. And it's you know what you desire and wish for and see, will this ever be, can you convince enough people to animate the tools the right way? Can you, and the only thing I think that makes any sense is, do you have the interest? Because he's available and waiting. And it's in a way, sometimes it feels futile. I kind of feel like Solomon at times. It's like, it's all meaningless, because this idea of saying we have a role to fulfill, but it seems like, and this is a question I've got for you because I struggle with this. Will we see the kingdom come in our lifetime before and without the return of Jesus himself in the way that we think of it? And
Yeah.
I want to say yes. I want to say, yeah, we're finally going to listen to him. And there's going to be enough people who do. And we're going to animate these tools the right way. And we're going to see the kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. But there's a part of me that thinks that, I don't know. What are your thoughts there? Because sometimes it's discouraging to me.
Well, it can be, because you're looking at your own experience and in contrast to the other 8 billion people out there that seem to be stuck.
Yeah.
And so there is a distortion in the view. It's a little bit like um, that picture that I shared at the Gen Con that you asked me to share about the high places versus seated with Christ in in heavenly places.
Yeah.
Is that, when you're looking up at the high place, gosh, you built that. It's still planted on the terra firma. You're looking up at it and you're calling it God, and you're wanting it to do things that, by gosh, you can't even do, and you're its creator. And yet you call upon it and worship it like it is a deity. Well, that's what it looks like when you're looking at this stuff around us that looks hopeless and helpless. But then there's another way to look at things, that is, that the Apostle Paul described as, we have been seated, past tense, with Christ in heavenly places. Well, who seated us there? God himself. The very Father seated us there, past tense. Well, what would happen if we actually started to say, Jesus, what's it like to be seated with you? Are you doing anything in that seat? If I get seated next to you, am I going to be doing anything? Are we just going to be hanging out, drinking Mai Tai? I mean, what's this actually look like to be seated with you?
Yeah.
Well, as I've shared so many times, Steve, you really want to know? Absolutely. Okay, here's what it looks like. Boom. All of a sudden, you start seeing as he sees. Do you know that this planet is one decision away from this whole thing being turned right side up?
Do tell.
One decision.
Do tell.
One decision. Hey, you went through it yourself, didn't you? Jesus, you alone have authority to speak to me.
Yeah, you're right.
No one else has authority to speak to me. You alone have authority to speak to me. I don't even know what that means.
Yep.
I'm just saying it. I'm declaring it. That is the exercise of my Elohim prerogative to rule. No other being has authority to speak to me except you. Now, I know they're rebellious and they're going to be yakking at me like crazy. There's going to be all kinds of white noise going out there, but you and you alone have authority to speak to me. Well, what has the effect of that declaration been in your life? One decision.
Yep.
One decision. You don't even know how to do it. You don't even know what it means. You just know that that's how you want to exercise your authority. Jesus, you alone have authority to speak to me. Now, there's all kinds of stuff that's implied in it. You got to teach me how to hear your voice. You got to teach me how to recognize you. There's all kinds of stuff I got to learn, but hey, I need to learn how to walk too.
What year was it for you when you said only you have authority to speak to me? Do you remember what year that was?
The first form of it was 77, 78. Here I am, Lord. I'm going. I'm yours. Where then the subsequent was, okay, I've shown you the path illustration I shared with you.
Yeah.
Which do you choose? The path of your dream or the path that's covered with the veil of fog? Wherever you are, Jesus, that's where I want to be. That's another expression of that. So those were early forms of that, but there then came a point, it was probably in about 1980, 83, I believe is when it was. And I remember, Matt, I was being hammered by spiritual forces in ways that I did not understand. I mean, I would just get my butt handed to me, left and right. I mean, I was totally outmatched. What I didn't realize at the time is the reason that was happening was because there was a war for control of God's Elohim man, which I was. We have no idea the extent to which the powers of darkness will go to retain their control over God's man. And we just think, oh, what's the big deal with that? Well, the big deal with that is because when you come into the Elohim role, when you come into that understanding, they know better than you do that you say to them, yeah, go ahead and you can hightail it into those swine. Yes, you can go there. They know that. They know that they can't, if a man wants to come to Jesus, it doesn't matter if there are 12 legions of angels controlling that guy. He's going to run to Jesus, and there's no power in creation that can stop that. They know that, we don't. So they will do anything and everything they can to secure control of that. And I was going through one of those very real experiences, and I remember just standing and declaring, no, I don't care what you do. You have no authority over me. Jesus, I am yours and yours alone. You alone. You alone. And I remember seeing the entirety of the heavens open up and literally, where it says the angels in heaven rejoice, I could literally see that entire thing happening. Because what I didn't realize is the entirety of heaven waits longing to see, if you will, just waiting for our declaration that he and he alone is our Lord. And when it happens, man, it is a very real thing. And the entirety of this planet is one decision away from that. And Satan knows it.
Wow.
So
Well,
it's not far off.
well,
It
and
is one decision away.
you think about, then everything we talk about is merely commentary. Because if
Yep.
you think about this, you're making a really, really strong case here. If the Matrix, movie comes into mind as a practical example of this. You sense that something is wrong, Neo, right? And it's really Mr. Anderson, right? When you go to church and you pay your taxes, and he sits in front of Morpheus. And of course, he's confused and he's like, "Yeah, I'll follow the white rabbit." And he finds himself in this place across from Morpheus. And he's like, "Do you want to know what it is?" And of course, in that scenario, he takes this pill.
Yeah.
And I think that what's interesting is I'm going to be really direct with this. Are you interested? And do you recognize that you are enslaved?
Yeah.
Because I think that's it, the clearest I could possibly put it is to say, it's like The Usual Suspects. The greatest, trick the devil ever played was to convince those he did not exist. And so here we are, and you're like, I don't want to know nothing. Put me back in the Matrix. I'm fine with the way that it is. If you're somebody that recognizes, hold on a second, do you mean, Steve, that all I have to do, that this isn't some religious prayer, this isn't some it's not some doctrine, it's not some denomination, that what you're saying is so powerful that Jesus is alive and he speaks. And there's so many ways in which we can show that that's true over time. This is my son, listen to him. Man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word. I do nothing apart from the Father. Is this invitation for us to say, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea how this works. But you know what? I'm only allowing you to speak to me. And you think about that idea, and it comes back to our original theme of this whole stream.
Yeah.
Everybody seems to want to have the alpha. Well, where do you think that phrase comes from?
Yeah.
What is the alpha? It's the original. It's the beginning, the alpha, the omega, this idea that you would have the source code. And I've always joked ever since September 10th of 2000, I was just blown away because I felt like, it's like you cut me in on the deal. It's like I got life cheat codes here. Do I do it all right all the time? No, but then he continues to deepen that. And it's even like what you said. I understood and I saw this benefit. I'm like, wow, peace that transcends all understanding. I couldn't sit still before then.
Yeah.
But then also, you had played baseball and you'd hit so many balls, but there was one day when you became a hitter.
Yeah.
And it seems like there are depths and levels to this thing where you say, I didn't recognize that I was listening to other spirits, right? Well, the practical of that we've talked about. The spiritual forces know how to trigger you. Why am I overreacting to these things? Why am I escalating these things? Why am I playing this game? It's like, hold on a second. No, I'm giving you the authority. Only you have the authority to speak to me. And this idea that I don't hear, and I think this is really important to note, I haven't been doing this as long as you have, Steve. But you know what? I almost feel like he custom tailors it to us, because what I see, the way he speaks to me is through pictures. I see images of things. I see things. Like I'll see a room and people sitting at a table. I will see things, kind of a vision of something. I will rarely hear, I don't hear anything audibly, but occasionally I'll hear in the spirit, good job. I'll often hear, trust me and I'll show you. Basically, you're not meant to know this. We need to carry the ark, bro. Stay in your lane. And other times it's like now, but there's a deep sense of what is right and what is not right. And I almost feel like a big part of how Jesus speaks to me is through peace or no peace. Sometimes I can't put my finger on why this isn't right.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I'm very sensitive to that, to say, all right, Lord, what are you doing here? How do you, and you've even taken it further to say, how do you see this?
Yeah.
And that's the cool thing. He's willing to answer us. If are we willing to have that dialogue and that conversation? And that's the thing that it's hard to, it's not a, it is an abstract thing.
Well, if I may, and it has been made to be abstract.
Yeah, I agree.
It has been one of the really tragic things that has happened from a human point of view is this thing called religion. And the effect of that, or one of the many effects of that, is it causes us to lose our ability to think, because we just start echoing. We just start regurgitating what we've been taught. My own training in that is, when Jesus was starting to break me of that, he would ask me what I would say something. So I would say something like, wow, we really need to get this guy saved. Right? And he'd say, what do you mean by saved? And he would take me down this entire litany of questions. And when I come away with it, I could give you 1,000 examples, literally. There was hardly a religious concept that I spoke that I thought was absolute truth that I would have died for, and I had no idea what it meant. I had no idea what these words meant when I got right down to it. I was talking in this one particular situation where there was an exchange, and the person said, have you asked Jesus, acknowledge that Jesus died for your sins, and have you declared him your Lord, which is a Christian formula? And I said, well, that means something very different to me today than what it used to. And I know what you mean by that is what it used to mean to me. My question is, what do you mean by being saved from my sin? What is sin to you? And the person got irate, saying, well, if you don't know what sin is, you're lost. I said, fine. How can I get saved from something I don't even know what it is then? That should be more of a reason for you to tell me what it is.
Yeah.
See? No, instead of them saying, oh, well, let me tell you what sin is, they got irate with me and walked off and was like, no, wait a minute. You're telling me I need to get saved from something that you can't even tell me what it is, even after I tell you that I don't know what it is. See? So how am I getting saved from something I don't know what it is? So the point is that we have lost our ability to think in the most basic terms. I mean, so let's start with, when you get up in the morning and you look outside, or after dinner, after your glass of wine, you decide you're going to go out and sit on the patio, and you look up at the stars, you look at the big old moon that's in the sky. Do you wonder how in the world it all got here? Well, you basically have two choices. You can either say somebody built it, or you say it happened all by itself. If you're one of those that lands on the side that somebody built it, it seems to me that the reasonable question is, what'd you have in mind when you built this thing?
Yeah, why is it here?
Yeah, this is no small effort.
No.
Somebody had to go to a lot of effort, expend a lot of energy and resources to build all of this. Why did you do that? Why doesn't anybody talk to us like that?
They don't. You're absolutely right.
That is the most basic, fundamental thing to ask. And if you ask it, then, if somebody has the ability to build all of this, do you think they might have the ability to speak?
Wow.
Huh. You don't even have to have any of the religious or biblical or scriptural construct in it. You simply look out with a bit of curiosity and say, wow, this dude has some skills. Why did you do this? And then how did you do it? If you land on the other side of the question that, oh, it happened by itself, I wonder if there's another place where I can see that something became something out of nothing. Is there, can I duplicate that process? Is there well, if I can't duplicate it, then how did that happen? And if you can't come up with how that happened, then man, now we're back to number one. Somebody must have done this thing and got to a lot of effort to make it happen. I'd like to know that guy. And by the way, Matt, I'm describing my own personal experience on that. I eventually got to the place where, hey man, I want to know you. I want to know the guy who built this. I don't know. I don't want to know about you. You know, there are a lot of opinions about who you are. There's a lot of things that are out there are telling me what I have to do to gain your favor. Hey, if that's the case, we're all screwed before we get started. So why did you build this? And what did you have in mind when you did it? And oh my goodness, off to the races we went. Okay? So we don't know how to think anymore. We don't know how to step back and say, well, gee whiz, if you did that, I wonder if it'd be a good idea for me to kind of get an idea what you had in mind. Matt, virtually everything we talk about on this program is telling you the result of those conversations.
No, absolutely.
I didn't know any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Not smart enough to figure out any of this stuff. It's him saying, come on up here with me. I'll show you what's going on.
And what's the proof of it too? You know, I shared with you in the green room before this huge list of all of the things that I can remember us talking about, right? All of these themes. And, you know, we often say, and I think the big ahas that I generally have are like, wow, this is really simple. It makes sense. Yeah. And you know, what's interesting is that's something that is, I think, a part of who he made us to be, is that, you know, when I came through, you know, my dad was a, you know, scientific, you know, secular guy. And my mom was, you know, was a believer, right? But my dad kind of ruled the roost, right? And so, you know, from my dad's perspective, you know, religious stuff was hokey. And my mom knew that, you know, she was, you know, working on us. And so any opportunity that we'd have to be exposed to Jesus, she would, you know, support. But it didn't come around very often, you know. And it's interesting, you know, my first experience with kind of religious things was in middle school. And I went to like the youth group or something. I was invited to play, I think, softball with you know, and my older brother was, and so he was tagging along with him. And I ended up in this middle school deal, and there's this lady, I mean, she must have been 100, that ran this, you know, youth group. And she said, you know, she wanted all the kids to bow their heads and close their eyes, and she'd say, raise your hand if you're not saved. And I thought, you know, what a hokey thing this is. And, you know, of course, you know, you wanted to fit in, and I wanted to do all this, but I knew, and it's interesting, you know, what we fashion that we think is good and what we think is right. And there was never, you know, there was talk of, you know, personal relationship with Jesus, right? There was kind of this talk about something. But I've always felt, really up until meeting you, that there wasn't anyone who was sharing the practical nature of walking this out in the moment. And so even now, I attend church on Sunday and I sit there and I go, yes, I agree. Jesus did some great things. Wow. And the Bible is an account of those great things.
Yes.
And I've read it, and it's some awesome stuff. Wow. Miracles, all of these things. And then I hear these stories about what's to come. and this promise of this future. But there's zero when it comes to, basically the only practical things that I hear from anyone is, well, um, be nice to people
Yeah.
and tell them about Jesus. And I was thinking about this. It's kind of hard to tell someone about someone that you don't talk with. It's hard
Yeah.
to relate to something. And, I've seen so many things that are, miraculous in my life, and you have as well. And you think, well, what's been the outcome? And what I always come back to is like this lowest common denominator. If I had to drill it all down and say, what is the benefit of following Jesus? Like, give me one thing. And I would say a peace that transcends all understanding is the biblical way I would say it. And the other would I say is rest.
Yeah.
I would say and contentment. And that's why I always come back, what's the currency of God?
Yeah.
And I realize, hold on, out of fear, I hoard. I want to achieve and be recognized. I want people to think that I'm somebody I'm not. I want to cover the things that I feel inadequate about. I want to puff up the things to make people like me or recognize me. And it's empty and I feel lost. And I recognize, hold on, here's one that continues to whisper in my ear, you're my son, I love you, and I will give you peace and rest. And I go, that's the thing that I've been looking for all this time. I've been chasing all of these things thinking that they were going to bring me peace and that I was going to have contentment, I was going to have proper perspective, and I was going to be able to endure this stuff. And I think about it, what drives us? What drives us to do crazy stuff? What drives us to, and whether it's, money and crypto, for example, and all this stuff, um, I'm like, I can get sucked into that stuff like the next guy. I like the game. But it's almost like I think once you've been humbled, like I've been humbled and you've been humbled,
Yeah.
it's like, all right, I got nothing. So he's constantly, it's constantly all coming back to him. And
Yeah.
I feel like no wonder so many people in jail find Jesus. No wonder so many people at the end of addiction find him, because you try everything you can in your life to try to make this thing work. And you just can't do it on your own.
Well, like the gentleman said to my friend, you've been pushing Jesus on me, forever, but I need real answers.
Right.
Well, man, if that's not a hope, let me just take stock of what that guy just told me. Huh? Jesus, what do you think about that? So we don't think in those terms. We instantly move on the defensive at some level, or we push blame or something like that instead of backing up and saying, hey, Jesus, what about that? I'm telling him about you, and he's telling me you're not enough. He needs real answers. Well,
I
let
think
me
if
tell you
people,
what he's telling you. He's telling you he needs real answers, and you're not offering.
well, and
Oh, okay. Well, let me regroup here.
I think people need to be encouraged to ask them yourself. That's what you did for
Yeah.
me. You
Yes,
said you
absolutely.
said, "Hey, ask them yourself." I almost feel like people don't think they can. I really mean that, Steve. I really think a lot of people think, "Well, I can't ask him what he thinks about this." And I know it
Well,
seems silly, but I really feel like people don't feel like they have permission because we talk about him so much and no one's ever saying, no, you can talk with him. And if you look at every freaking account in the Bible, they're talking directly to him.
yes, and they're recording it. Well, Matt, see, you just hit the nail on the head. Why is that so? We described a few minutes ago that we can only think the way we've been taught to think. And we've been taught to think that anyone who talks to God is a flippant psycho.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you mean God talks to you? Oh, who are you? Who do you think you are that God talks to you?
Right.
Well, whose nature and character is speaking that? Who is the origin of that nature and character? Whose benefit To whose benefit does that statement accrue? Does it benefit God? Does it benefit us who are interested in knowing God? Who does it benefit? Doesn't benefit God, doesn't benefit us. Who do you think you are that God talks to you? Oh, I can't talk to you because if you say God's talking to you, then I can't. Who can compete with that? See, everything that we are taught sets up defenses against doing the very thing that we're told we need to have, which is a personal relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, it's
Well,
crazy how, yeah.
what relationship is personal where there's not dialogue? There's nothing personal about that. As a matter of fact, we talked about it last week, I think. If a father doesn't talk to his son, we call that abuse. Well, why is it the earthly father can be accused of being abusive if he doesn't talk to his children, and yet our heavenly father, if he talks to us, we're considered wackos?
Yeah.
See? I mean, these things are just, once again, step back and go, whoa, what are we talking about here? What's happening? Okay, Hex Monkey doing that. Awkward and challenging for me, working on it. Good for you. That's it. Working on it.
Yep.
Guess what? Eventually, this surprisingly awkward and challenging will eventually become as easy as breathing. Just keep practicing. Okay? And don't expect more of yourself. It's not your responsibility to learn to hear, it's his responsibility to teach. Our responsibility is to be attentive. Okay?
Okay, I just had like something just hit my brain here. Oh my gosh. Okay, Hex Monkey, I got something for you. This is, it's really interesting is I can relate so much to you.
Yep.
Because that's been my experience too, and of course I dealt with this since I was in middle school. So what really resonates with me in this scenario is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And what's interesting about it for me is this idea, what does it mean to trust in the Lord with all your heart? Right. And I think about this. Well, if there are spiritual forces that don't want us listening to Jesus, right? They would do everything we can to use social pressures to say, you can't listen to God, right? All the things we just defined. This idea, what does it mean to trust in the Lord with all our heart and lean not on our own understandings? Okay, so this is such a meaningful reminder to me all the time. Okay, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. So the way in which I understand, I can't rely on. Right. So there's a way in which I understand things that are not his ways. Okay. So he's defined that. Okay. So I'm going to trust in the Lord with all my heart. And I'm going to say, okay, my understandings are the self thing that I've got is going to lead me in the wrong direction because look at the results I've gotten. In all your ways, acknowledge him. And I think what's interesting, you talk about interest, Steve, so often. Yeah. And I love the way that this is written. And, I'm sure there are many different translations of this. In all your ways, submit to him, some of them say. In all your ways, acknowledge him. Well, what is all? And I that's what I've been practicing. This is a part of my own journey. It's like, well, what is all my ways? And I said to you the other day, Steve, I was like, I'm making a list of stuff and I'm like trying to think about the day and all the stuff I have to do. And I go, hey, Jesus, what am I forgetting?
Yeah.
And he tells me.
And right on.
And literally, I'm like, where does that come from? Well, it has to come from him, right? It's not like I get to the end of my list, I'm like, what is it? And I go, hey, Jesus, what am I missing? And it seems so weird. And I acknowledge that, Hex Monkey, that it feels awkward at times. You're like, what do you mean? And what I think is really cool is that there's so many things in the scriptures that remind us that, well, what is this idea of holding every thought captive? What does it mean to pray without ceasing? What does it mean to not rest on your own understandings, but in all my ways acknowledge him? It didn't say in all your ways be like him exactly. No, it says
or know it all.
Or know it all. In all your ways acknowledge him. Okay, so I'm living in the context of the moon and the stars and this creation, and you made me, and I'm like in your likeness, and this guy Steve says I'm like an Elohim. I have no idea what that means, but I'm going to acknowledge you. I'm going to acknowledge you. Hey, okay, you're a direct part of this thing. And I went through this whole phase of this idea of the veil being thin, right? Like the veil to me is like one side of the coin, other side of the coin, physical, spiritual, and it being super thin, pressing my face up against this thin veil. And, and I think about that literally of going, hey, I'm here. I'm interested. Hey, what's going on over there? Like, help me understand. How does this become one? In all your ways, acknowledge, and he will make your path straight. And in that straight, I realized something, and this has been over the period of the last 8 months with you, Steve, is that my path has been swerving a lot over my life. But amazingly, he's been with me the whole time.
Yes.
And what's amazing is even the story of the prodigal son, I did find myself eating the slop of pigs.
Yeah.
And what is a straight path? And in this whole thing, the straight path isn't a path of big crypto bags and diamond hands and Lambos. The straight path is one of peace. But then there's also this idea of like, the more and more I crab walk and I become more of a professional and I take it seriously and I discipline myself and I go, you're the only one that has the authority to speak to me. What do I see? The outcomes of that is the revealing of things that he would like me to do. And then there are ideas and there are all these things. And I say, hold on a second. So you want me to carry the ark? You want me to partner with you in work that you're doing? Hold on. And it's going to be easy for me because you created me to do it in advance. And you showed me all these things and you redeem everything I've ever done in my life and why I was so into gold and why I'm so into aliens and all of these things. You're redeeming all of that stuff and you're actually folding that in to the story moving forward. Hold on. You've been at work and you created all this since the beginning of time began. And I'm obviously now just coming into an understanding that, hold on a second, there's way more to this life than eating and sleeping and dining. And hold on a second. The richness and fullness of this also has its reward. Because as we talked about stewardship yesterday or last time, there's this idea of like, hold on, good job. I gave you a little bit and you did a good job with it. Here's some more. What? Yeah. Ultimately, you're going to be in charge of 5 or 10 cities. And you think about this, like, not everyone, I mean, it's pretty clear in the scriptures too. There's weeds and there are wheat. There are sheep and there are goats. There are things that are made for noble and things for ignoble purposes. And it's like, hold on a second. So if I'm hearing your voice and I'm hearing this story and I'm understanding that I can trust in you and you'll make my path straight. I want a straight path because you're the one who created the path.
Yeah.
So this sounds like real life. This sounds like, hold on a second. And what's amazing about it is this is the way it's supposed to be.
Yes.
It only feels like a shortcut because we live in the upside down world. This is actually the way it's supposed to be. And in contrast of this darkness, it seems like a shortcut. It seems like we're cut in on the deal. It seems like, wow, I got the bonus in this one. But I think what's so incredible is to say, I'm just going to do what the farmer does, Steve. I'm just going to, you know what? I'm going to recognize that I don't germinate the seed. I don't make the sun shine. I don't make the rain fall. And I do not create the harvest, but I will wait on the Lord. And there will be yield that comes from this. And that's what I love about even Richard Hart products. He actually aligned this with the very structure and framework of things, whether he knew it or not.
Yeah.
So I get excited about that, Hex Monkey, because I can relate to you 1000%. Because it felt hokey, and I think that's how so many forces keep us from this. And this isn't something you have to broadcast, and you don't have any responsibility to teach others. You just have to ask him, and he's available. And the question is, the proof's in the pudding. That's what I would say. Don't trust me. Don't listen to Steve. It either has power or it doesn't. And when I, September 10th of 2000, said, all right, this has been a bunch of BS to me up until this point, but if you're real, you're going to have to show me that this is real power, not fake stuff, not churchy stuff, not I got to fake this. This is some game I play in to fit into society. And he said, nope, I'll lift 1,000 pounds off your back and I'll make you laugh. And I go, all right, I'm in. But if it's not real, and that's the coolest thing about this, not that I would test God, but that I just see him wink at me over and over and over and over. Sorry, I just kind of got on a roll there.
No, do not apologize. That's what it's all. I mean, that's what it's all about. I mean,
Yeah.
eventually you have your own stories,
Right.
and you've been kind enough to say, Steve, share with my audience some of the things we talk about and the stories that you're experiencing, and that's what I do. And Hex Monkey's going to have his own stories, and one of them is going to be, man, when I first started this, it was really awkward and weird, but I just kept after it, and eventually it became like breathing. That's my vocabulary. Hex Monkey will have his own.
Yeah.
Eventually, because guess what? That's what happens when you practice. I mean, name one thing in your life that you got good at that you didn't have to practice. Name one.
Yeah. Not one.
I don't have a single one. See? I had to practice. I had to start from the very basics, screw it up. And why do you think you call it practice? Because in practice, you have the liberty to screw things up. Because when you screw it up and you learn how to not do it, that helps you learn how to do it.
But you know what, though? I will also say, Steve, you did hit a home run when you were 14. But that's the beauty of the process, Hex Monkey.
Yeah.
He lets you hit a home run at 14. And that's the cool. I feel like it's with golf, I terrible screw everything up. I just want to throw my clubs into the water. And then that one shot, and I'm like, I'm back.
Back. That's right. Only one good shot around, and you're spending your $50 the next weekend.
Well, I had this experience with Ray yesterday. I was really struggling with a decision. I was kind of in this weird spot, and I felt very uncomfortable. And Ray was there, and I'm like, Ray, I just need to talk to you, man. And I broke it down. I just said, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. And you know what he said? He says, what's Jesus telling you to do?
Yeah, right on.
He's like, you know what to do.
Right on.
Rather than like giving me some prescription, he's just like, hey, what do you think? And I'm like, yeah, I do know what to do. I do know what to do. I know what he's telling me to do. And you know what? There was fruit from acting on that.
Yes.
And then when I was done with it, he said to me, good job.
See?
And that to me was like, and it wasn't just good job, like, hey, he spoke to me audibly. He didn't. I had peace, a deep sense of peace about it. And I was like, all right, let's move forward. And I think about that with every decision or everything that we make, is this idea of this currency is peace about things. And it's the one thing that I think drives so many people is it's almost they go from crisis to crisis and fear to fear. And it's debilitating.
Well, one of the things about the kingdom of God and that you eventually learn is it is totally void of confusion, of conflict, of irritation, of vengeance, of fear, of uncertainty. It is. Do you mind if I tell you a story?
I love your stories.
And there are a few of them here and these are very, very practical, folks. I can tell you stories in business, that were mind blowing. We were living in Great Bend, Kansas at the time, and I had this sense for about a year that we were going to move. And we'd already been in Great Bend a couple of different times in the 80s. And so this is like, around 87, something like that. And so finally, I just said, okay, Lord, this thing is really driving me crazy. Either I need to know what you've got in mind here, so we can take whatever action you need us to take, or I'm just going to put this out of my mind and forget about it. Because I've been trying to be attentive here for about a year, and this thing is starting to wear on me some. So I got my pen and my pad out, and getting ready to write, as was my custom in those days. And man, instantly starts speaking. And there was like, do you remember the old when it got to be like midnight in the old televisions where the circle came up and the
Yeah.
that static
Yep.
sound. Well, that's what it sounded like. Man, I was trying to, make heads or tails. And finally I said, okay, Lord, when you're ready to talk to me, I'm listening. So whenever you're ready to do that, I'm in. And now, first of all, do you notice the dialogue that's kind of happening? The nature of the exchange. I know he's talking to me about something. I know there's a time frame for when this is going to happen. It's not occurred over the previous year, so it's starting to become irritating. So now I'm going back to him for clarification. As I go back to him for clarification, I'm ready to hear and act on what he's saying. And the moment I say, okay, I'm ready, static, spiritual interference.
Hmm.
You see? So then what was the response? I'm not going to react to that. I'm not going to, muscle my way through it. No, it's not my responsibility to hear. It's my responsibility to be attentive to hear. And that whatever it is, there's interference. Okay, Lord, when you're ready to do it, we'll do this thing. I'm ready. About 30 minutes later, I'm sitting in the chair, and all of a sudden, I see this like a tube come down over the top of me. It wasn't a physical tube; it was a spiritual tube. Things that we don't see, there's audible speaking, but they're speaking, but that's in the spirit. It's not heard with the physical ears. See, we don't yet know how to distinguish the physical from the spiritual. And so, anyway, there was this tube that came down over the top of me and completely enveloped me. And Matt, it was totally void of disorder. It's the only way I have ever been able to describe it. It wasn't that there was no disorder, it was totally void of any disorder. It was a measure of peace and orderliness that the human language does not have the ability to describe. And then what would happen is I would receive the answer before I could form the question. Yes, are we going to move? By the end of the summer, when? Out of town, in town or out of town? Out of state, in state or out of state? It went just like that, and it happened with such rapid fire that my mind did not have the ability to process the answer before I formulated the question, because the question is what was in my mind, not the answer, if that makes any sense. And so he gave me the entire instructions by before the end of the summer, before school starts, you'll be moving to Oklahoma City. There is some work I need to have you do down there. And we'll make all the arrangements so that can happen. This, by the way, was around the end of June. So we had like 6 weeks for all of this to come together. And as soon and all of this, by the way, everything I shared with you came before I formulated the question. Okay. When we were finished, the tube raised and I was back into the world of disorder, and it was marked. I could feel it. I could see it. I could sense it. I now know what disorder looks like and what the absence and void, the total absence of disorder is like. And they are not even in the same universe or creation. So fast forward, we had some friends that were in Fowler, Kansas, which is right on the border between Oklahoma and Kansas. We were down there visiting, got there on a Friday evening. It was part of our custom. We would spend a weekend with them. They'd come to Great Bend and spend a weekend with us. And so Saturday morning, I get up, have my time, and Jesus says, "Okay, I need you to gather up everything and head to Oklahoma City, and don't come home until you found a place to live." Oh, wow. Well, Lord, I only have about $150 to my name. It doesn't matter. Go down there. Don't come back until you found a place to live. Okay, so I tell our friends, I tell my wife. She says, "What are you talking about? We're not ready to go down there and stay until we find a place to live. I mean, we just got to." She told me all the practical things, that our wives are so good at. Um, I said, "Yeah, I know. Well, let's hope. Hopefully, this will be a quick trip." So I tell my friends, we pack up, we head down there. The kids are all excited about it, and they're younger at the time. And so we go down there, we check into Red Carpet Motel, and we don't have a clue about Oklahoma City. But what we have is $150. Finally, about our motel room was like about $40. Now we're down to, and I think we were down to our last $20. So I get up in the morning and I say, "Okay, Lord, we're here. You told me I can't go home until we find a place to live. I've got $20 left on my name, and my wife is a little irritated.
A little.
What do we do?" And he said, "Well, if I told you, you wouldn't believe me." I said, "Well, I know that's true because you just said it, but I don't have a choice. What do we do?" He said, "Go buy a house." And I started laughing just exactly like you did. Go buy a house. I got 20 flipping bucks.
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay, Lord, if you want to drop 25 grand on me before today to go do all it needs to be done to go buy a house and all that stuff. And by the way, where do we buy this? There are 10,000 other questions, right?" So I said, "Okay, Lord, what do we do here?" He said, "Well, you asked me and I told you. Now you do what you want with what I've told you." So I said, "Okay." So I come out of the bathroom and I go to my wife, and where the kids and my wife are sitting around there, and in the motel room, and she's sitting on the bed. She said, and so my kids start saying, "Okay, Daddy, what did Jesus say? What did Jesus say? Okay, Daddy, what did Jesus say?" They're all excited like they were. And my wife is just snarling at me.
Yeah.
"Okay, what's up? What did he say?" I said, "Well, you wouldn't believe me if I told you." She did not laugh.
No, she did not. I know that.
She did not laugh. And she said, "Well, okay. So what did he say?" I said, "We're to buy a house." And she said, "Okay, I've had enough."
Yeah.
And I'm telling on her a little bit,
Yeah.
because this is the real world of trusting.
Yeah.
We think of trust in Jesus and stuff like that, like it's this big, emotional landmark thing that we do. No, trust only exists in the presence of risk.
Yeah.
That's the only place it exists. And man, we were in deep risk. So my wife was experiencing or demonstrating the intensity of the risk that we were experiencing at that moment. And it was no small thing. So we're laughing that we can laugh about it now, but at the time it wasn't funny. And so my kids were going, "Oh, yay, Daddy. So we're going to buy a house. Okay, how fun." And so they go outside and my wife goes and follows them. And this story is a little long, but I think it's worth telling because it demonstrates some of the very practical elements of learning how to live in this way. And it is very awkward a lot of times until you learn. So I said, okay, what do we do? We're supposed to buy a house. What do we do? So I pull out the newspaper. They had newspapers in those days. I went into the classified, into the housing, and I start pulling on some of my real estate background. And I said, well, the only way we can do this is if a home seller is willing to carry the paper.
Yep.
Because like I said, we got 20 bucks. And so I start looking for the for sale by owners. I go through 3 or 4 of them. About the 4th or 5th one that I call, and all of them are saying, no, they're not willing to carry the paper. We need to be cashed out, yada, yada. I finally get to this guy. He's probably the 5th one, 4th or 5th one. So I tell him my story. I said, don't know if you'd be interested, but I need somebody who's willing to carry the paper. Are you that guy? He said, yeah, I could probably do that. He said, what are you looking for? So I told him my story. He said, I've got the exact house for you. It is the perfect house for you and your family. I said, really? He said, yeah, why don't you plan on meeting me this afternoon at 4:00 and I'll show it to you. I have some people living in it right now and I just need to give them a little heads up. And so it'll be available for you at 4:00. So he gave me the directions. We didn't have GPS, so I had to write it down with all the instructions, and I know nothing about this city that I'm in. We get there, and it's in this beautiful neighborhood in this beautiful house on the outside. My wife is saying, wow, what's this all about? We go inside. He welcomes us in, lets us go through the house. Every detail of the house was precise to the appointments of our furniture. Even to the extent in the bedroom, they had this, not the wainscoting, but the, little edging around.
Yep.
And inside there was wallpaper on the inside of this. And that wallpaper was the identical pattern to our bedspread. Identical.
Of course.
We had certain dimensions of things fit perfectly. Everything was precise. And I said to him, I said, wow, you said this house is perfect for us. Man, that's the way that it's looking. And he said, well, tell me your story. And I said, well, and I told him, good Lord told me to buy a house, that I can't go home until I've found my house. I've got 20 bucks to my name. The only way I can do this is if you carry the paper, and my bank is willing to cash you out. Not my bank, but his bank was willing to allow us. And it was during a depressed time in the real estate market in 88. He said, I can do that. I said, wait a minute, I don't have a nickel to put down. He says, well, you're okay with signing a promissory note, aren't you? I said, yeah. He said, we'll do the deal. Shook my hand. So at 9:00 in the morning, when Jesus said to buy a house and I had 20 bucks and laughed at him, by 4:00 that afternoon, we were the owners of a brand new house that perfectly fit every appointment in our furniture, with our furniture in that house. And we drove home from Oklahoma City to Great Bend, Kansas, which was about three hours away, just singing and praising and just having a grand old time, because what was impossible 8 hours earlier was done, and we're heading home with our last 20 bucks. And gas was cheap enough then. I could put about $15 of gas in and had enough to buy us a little food heading home. That's what it looks like. Now, I couldn't make up that story with 10 writers, but Jesus does. And that's what it looks like when going back to don't lean on your own understanding, kind of a thing. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. When he says, trust me, you can know that there is a bunch of risk waiting for you around the corner. But that's why he's saying, trust me. I've already got the issues dealt with in the areas of risk. I am no risk. It's no risk with me. It's only risk without me.
What a story. It's amazing, Steve. This is the practical stuff. And I think about why it's so important to have community, right? Just that story is such an encouragement to me, and I think that, you even talk about the tube of order, right? You're sitting inside of this ordered place. I mean, it's such an encouragement to me, and I think to so many others who are in such difficult situations. And, this whole secular worldview that people have and, what people are told is that there is nothing supernatural. You're just tripping and falling into this, you're alone. And, there's so many stories like that one. I'm sure you have 100 of those stories.
Yeah.
I have stories like that, but I've also heard stories over generations. And some things that you're now. What's amazing about it is, and I mentioned to you before, this era of thinking about the veil, right? Poking my head through it, going, "Hey, hey, over there."
Mhm.
I met a guy. He's like, he had. There's a woman in his business who, she was kind of weird. People knew that she was kind of weird, and she would say, "There's a 12-foot angel with a sword standing in the corner," and they kind of laughed it off. And it's really interesting. We don't recognize the fact that when I read the scriptures and I see the accounts, and then you talk about, hey, we're the only ones who are in the spiritual and in the physical. It's stories like this that remind me and give me such confidence that this is ultimately the true partnership in this. And it almost seems like God is so pleased with you. And I think about how he credited it as righteousness, right? Faith, like, wow, you actually believe me. And that, I think about the centurion who's like, no, I'm a man under authority. Like, and Jesus, like, amazed by his faith. Or the woman who touches the hem of his garment. If I just touch the hem of his garment, and power went out of him, and he was amazed by her faith. I think about that, is that try him on for size.
Yeah.
And he's not it's not a cash machine. It's not it's not a slot machine kind of thing. But what's amazing though is when I started coming his direction, he came my direction too.
Yeah, right on.
You know what I mean? Like when I leaned into him, he leaned into me.
Yes.
And it's just such an encouragement that I take that as, you're not alone. You're not alone. He sees you. And
it's partnership.
Yeah.
It is partnership. I mean, it's another one of those that is not just a conceptual word. That is a practical word. When you're in partnership with somebody, guess what? Neither of you are alone.
Yeah.
Neither of you are facing the challenges of your business, of your marriage, of whatever it is. You're not facing that alone. You have a partner. Yeah. And that partner is there, dealing with that issue with you, good or bad, difficult or easy, fun or not so fun.
Yeah.
It is an absolute partnership. If I told you, you wouldn't believe me. Well, okay, you're right. I won't, but I still want to know.
Well,
okay, good.
It reminds me of nothing has seized you except what is common to man.
Yeah.
Right. I'm seized up with fear. I'm seized up with not knowing. I'm seized up with, I'm debilitated by this. Nothing has seized you except what is common to man. But God is faithful, and he will give you a way out. And what is that way out? Hey, go to Oklahoma City, buy a house. You're like, what?
Yeah.
And he makes a way where you're like, those are your understandings, where you think that there is no way. And he makes that way. I just want you to see this feedback on your story. Terrence says, beautiful experience. Thank you for sharing. Cookie de Chocolate says, with God, all things are possible. David Lee's like, fire. And 100%. Crypto Ethos says, I must say, I have tears in my eyes just listening to this, not just from the joy, but from the trust.
Wow.
I needed to hear this story today. God brought me here today. Amazing.
Oh, wow.
Tank's like, come on, Steve, let's go. Hex Force One, love that story, Steve. There's a big lesson to be learned there. And Tank is like, man, that's just what the doctor ordered. You know what's so neat too about community is why so many festivals? Why so many times did God say, hey, the Sabbath is for man? Why did he say, hey, remind your son when you wake up and when you walk on the path and when you lay down? We have to have each other reminding us. And what a blessing it is to go, what Steve just shared with you folks is not scripture, right? But it's an account of Jesus at work in the moment.
Yes.
Everything that we read in the scriptures, every story that we hear is an account of what he has done in the moment. I think the whole purpose of all this stuff for me, my big takeaway is Jesus is alive and he speaks.
Yeah.
Steve, once again, thank you so much for doing this. We'll do it again next time.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
You guys have a great weekend.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Ooh, man, just when I, think it can't get any better, it gets better. What an amazing story. I hope you're encouraged by all this stuff. I think there could be nothing better. Tank said, that's just what the doctor ordered. I think that's exactly right in this bear market. In a way, when you're struggling, that's when you have your ears open. When things are like up and to the right and we're like, man, look at this one Lambo. It's almost like, consider it pure joy, brothers, when facing troubles of many kinds. I think this is what he was saying. It's like, when you're really struggling, this is the time when we learn, right? We learn from these challenges. And it's a time where we actually can like open our ears and go, hey, I got nothing. And that's where I see such breakthroughs is like when I am at the end of myself, when I'm like, well, I don't have the skills to do this. And this thing, it seems like a father. I think about my own son. He doesn't know what his father knows. He doesn't know these things. And, my son who is adopted and he's like, and I have to remind him, I'm like, everything I have is yours. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, everything, you're a son, you're an heir. I said, son, there's so many things God is doing in my life, and you're an extension of that. You've been grafted into our family, and he has work for you to do. And it's amazing, even in the natural, being a father who says that to a son. I mean, how much more the one who created it all would say to us. And so Steve's story is just such a reminder that you're not alone. Do not give up. Do not let your heart be troubled. I pray for you that you would have a peace that transcends all understanding. And that comes really from this engagement, right? So it's incredible. It's incredible. It's like we've been cut in on the deal. Folks, thank you for joining the Pulse today. My name is Matt, the Scripted Heartbeat. Take care of yourself and do not mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.